Hello, everybody. My name is Daryl Cloran. I'm the artistic director here at the Citadel Theater. Thank you very much for joining us for today's masterclass with Hannah Moscovitch. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I'm speaking to you from is Treaty Number 6 territory and the traditional meeting ground and home of the First Nations, including both the treaty signatories, Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney, and Cree Iroquois, as well as other indigenous peoples such as the Blackfoot and the Métis. We extend our appreciation for the opportunity to create, perform, and virtually host you here on this territory. Also, a big thanks to the Edmonton Community Foundation for supporting our Masterclass series. It's been a really incredible month of Masterclasses, and it's gone so well that we're gonna do them all summer. So we'll tell you more news about that at the end. Also today, today's Masterclass is being interpreted. So we're very happy to welcome Ava and Helen, our ASL interpreters, to today's class. Now I'd like to welcome our producer, jvanrijn, to come and give us all the details about how to interact with today's class.
Hello,
Jessie.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. We're, as always, we're having some fun with some technical issues, but I'm learning so quickly and I feel so excited. Today is the first time we've got ASL interpretation and that's really awesome. So I'm really happy to have Ava and Helen here. Today's session is being recorded and will be available online later this week for a short time. So it'll be up until Monday. And a quick note that if you are phoning in today, this will be an audio only experience and you will not be able to submit questions or comment on the session. You can enable closed captioning by clicking on the CC at the bottom of your screen, and given any potential technical issues with captioning, if it drops out or anything like that, please know that we do have a transcript available later this week. We have turned off all mics and video for the participants during the session to save bandwidth for those in smaller communities with less robust communication networks. So the two best ways to engage on the webinar are going to be the chat box, which is where you can say hello, you can tell us where you're calling in from, and the chat function, or pardon me, the Q&A function. The Q&A allows for you to ask questions of Hannah during the session. So if you have a question pop up, just place it in there. And the really cool feature that we use is upvoting. So if someone else has asked a question and you have the same question, instead of asking it again, just click the little thumbs up and it'll upvote it. And that prioritizes the questions for us. And given that we have 250 people registered for today's class, it gives us a chance for everyone to share what they're wanting to know. And then if you have any questions for me on the chat box, there's a little blue button. If you select all panelists, I will get that message, and only the panelists will get that message. If you click all panelists and attendees, then that's where you're sharing it with the whole group. I think that's it. I'm gonna go unless you need anything else.
That's great. Lovely to see you. Thanks for that.
Nice to see you too. Have fun.
Okay, it is my great pleasure to introduce our Masterclass instructor today. She has been the playwright in residence at the Tarragon since 2007. She's known for many incredible plays, including East of Berlin, This is War, Infinity, Bunny, Old Stock, which we had the pleasure at the Citadel of having a part of the development of, and which has gone on to incredible things across the world. She is the winner of the Yale University's Wyndham Campbell Prize, a Trillium Book Award. She's been a finalist twice for the Governor General's Award, twice for the Simonovich Prize, nominated for the International Susan Smith Blackburn Prize, and is an all-around pretty fantastic person. It is my pleasure to welcome today's instructor, Hannah Moscovitch. There you are. You made it. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for doing this, Hannah.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. The one play that I didn't mention in the list was a show that you and I did a million years ago together. A really incredible play called The Mill, which was this 4-part series of plays that we put together, for which you wrote this really incredible ghost story. And it, as for theater, I don't often see ghost stories, and I was always so struck by like how you really figured out that genre for theater and how to make something sort of really psychologically scary.
Well, I tried hard anyway.
Well, that's great. Anything else you need from me before I go?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. Well, I'll be here cheering for you. Have a great time.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. I'm on my own. Okay, well, I guess I have 2 weird things. Well, I have a couple of weird things to tell you. Like, so 14 years ago, I had a car accident and I knocked out a bunch of my teeth in it. And sometimes my teeth, which are all messed, need repairs, but because there's a pandemic on, I can't have my teeth repaired right now, obviously without putting people in danger. So there's a tooth missing. So I just feel like I want to be upfront about that. That's what's going on. Yeah. So that, and I also wanted to, because I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where I live, I just wanted to, I wanted to say I'm on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. I've never done a land acknowledgement before, and it just made me emotional. Okay, so, hi from Halifax, someone's from Halifax. Okay, so I want to say first, in my experience, a lot of playwriting instruction focuses on inspiration and how to have an idea. And I think that's important, but I'm not going to talk about it. What I'm going to talk about is how to shape the idea once you've had it. Also, it feels like lecturing like this on playwriting is a rare thing to do, and structure felt like the one area that I could sort of speak to at length on Zoom, and that might be useful to writers and theater creators and directors, dramaturgs. But also, it feels like it's going to be on the technical side, so it might be boring. So I'm going to risk that. So I'd say that part of the reason that I'm aware of the technical side of writing is that I work in other mediums. And when you're writing in TV and film, it's pretty standard to speak technically or structurally about writing. Anybody who works in TV and film as a writer will know that. It's less common in theater. You know, I could probably speculate about why it's you know, more common in TV to speak technically about story, probably because, you know, it's a medium in which story is primary and you write quickly and you write on a team. And so you need to be able to use a sort of mechanical common language in order to speak about what you do. And I think in theater, we tend to see story in our art form as that there's mystery in it. And we think speaking technically might interfere with the art being good, which it might for some writers. I don't know. It doesn't for me personally. So, okay. I will say this too. I think I tend to find having an idea the easy part of playwriting. I'm natural. The hard part is structuring our plot and story. So I don't struggle with ideas, and I'll talk in depth later about what I see as the possible disadvantages of coming at writing and theater creation from a sort of story structure or a story heavy perspective. Yeah. Okay, so in some cases, just as a warning, I'm going to restate the same information in various ways in case one way is more helpful than another to speak about all of this. And for some of you, this way of thinking about story might be new. And for others, it might be review. Like there's a really uneven knowledge of story structure in theater, I find. And so, which means I'm gonna, also just like, aside from it being technical and that potentially being boring, I may bore the shit out of some of you just because you're aware of all this already. And then some of you I may leave in the dust. Yay! Okay. And I can't tell because this is Zoom. Okay, so the way I see it, if I simplify down all the way, is that there are two interwoven components of a theater project, vision and structure. And the vision is the meaning of events that occur in your piece. And the structure is the mechanics of the story, the plot, the series of events and actions that comprise the narrative. So you could also sort of say that structure is how to write a play versus vision, which is why you're writing your play. Structure is how you deliver content, and vision is the content that you're delivering. I'd say that the tone or style and or form of your piece fall into both camps and hold vision and structure together. More on this later. When I write, I don't think in terms of structure or vision. I write on instinct and I write from character. Then I work on the structure and the vision when I'm revising, and I tend to revise a lot. I revise 30 or 40 times drafts. For me, structure is something I check that I have after I have a character and an idea that I'm pursuing. So I would say, like, you can divide, just as a sidebar, writing and writers into two camps. Like I'd say you can divide, I see that writers come at it either emergent or they mastermind. So if you are an emergent writer, what you tend to do is you execute in order to design your work. And if you are a masterminder, you design and then you execute. I'm an emergent writer. A lot of people, when I've like twice, I think, given this particular masterclass, and I think 90% of people tend to say they're emergent, and then 10% of people say they're masterminders. If you're a masterminder, what you'll do generally is outline before you start. Whereas if you are an emergent writer, you will tend to write to find it, and both have advantages and disadvantages. I think people who are emergent as writers tend to discard a lot more of their work. I think that the danger with masterminding is that it can get too schematic. It can get too obvious. Okay, so I'm gonna focus. So now that I've said there's vision and there's structure, I'm gonna focus on structure for a while and then come back to vision. So oh my gosh, things are falling. A tiny overview of structure. Structure is what we call it when we bring the protagonist into conflict with his or her or their world. So structure is the plot or series of escalating events. Of course, yeah, but it's actually also what entertains the audience. So it's what the audience is watching. It's the mechanism of suspense, because structure opens up a suspenseful question in the mind of the audience. So the audience asks what's going to happen, and that question is a response to your structure. And then the structure answers that question or deliberately doesn't answer that question or fucks with the audience in various ways about if they're going to answer or not answer it. So an example that's really simple from Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet. Hamlet speaks to the ghost of his father and finds out that his father was murdered. The audience asks, what's Hamlet going to do now that he knows that his father was murdered by his uncle? Is he going to avenge his father? That question opens up in our mind, and that question is the structure of the play. Oh, I just gave you an example from Hamlet. I'm not going to bother with Romeo and Juliet. I'll do Romeo and Juliet later. So I've broken down plays into vision and structure, and now I'm going to break down structure into three parts. So bear with me. So there's three parts. The first one is inciting incident. The inciting incident is the event that generates or unleashes the desire in the protagonist. So the inciting incident is the event that happens to the protagonist, and it starts the conflict. The world of the protagonist is thrown out of balance by the inciting incident. So, for example, Romeo and Juliet. Romeo crashes a party and he sees Juliet. It happens to him, it unbalances his world, it unleashes desire, and it brings him into conflict with his world. I often think of the inciting incident as kind of like it's like a blow to the face. What's important about the inciting incident is that the world is altered and shaken at the beginning of the play. A desire is created in the protagonist, which is going to move them into action, and that the desire is major. Arthur Miller called it an unstoppable emotion, which I like. So yes, and the inciting incident opens up the central question in the mind of the audience and starts the suspense motor of the piece. So, i.e., will Romeo get to fuck Juliet is the question we're all asking in Romeo and Juliet. And if he does, what will the consequences of that be for him, for her, for his family, for Verona? So it opens up suspense and theme questions both. So the suspense question is like, will he get to fuck her? But the theme question is fused to the structure of the story. Okay, but more on that later. I'm going to get to how theme questions get opened up. But for now, personal and specific questions and universal questions open up in the minds of the audience in the moment of the inciting incident occurring. An example of this, just to hold you to the idea that theme questions get opened up to, is will Macbeth become king? But also, is naked ambition self-destructive, or is it the only way to rule? Is the question that gets opened up in the inciting incident of Macbeth, I think. Okay, also, sidebar, if there are two timelines or there are subplots, then there will be more than one inciting incident. A bunch of inciting incidents will open up in the subplots and in the different timelines. I hope that makes some sense. Okay, sidebar 2, in theater, okay, we often don't show the inciting incident. Like, it's really common to leave it out, and it's just happened just before whatever we're seeing on stage. So for instance, in Saltwater Moon, the inciting incident is Jacob hears that his childhood sweetheart, Mary, is going to marry another man. That happens at some point before the play begins, and then he travels back to Newfoundland, and the inciting incident happens long before that, and then we catch up with him when he's already pursuing his desire, which is to marry Mary. Okay, so rising action is number 2. So in structure, there's 3 parts. The first is inciting incident. The second is rising action. We're on number 2. Okay, so we've had the inciting incident. Now the protagonist has a desire. They go out into the world with that desire and they pursue it. This is rising action. They encounter obstacles or forces of antagonism. So there's different levels of antagonism or conflict that your character can encounter. There's the physical world, for instance, which would be all disaster movies. There's the interpersonal, which is most theater. Long Day's Journey into Night is like one of those sort of perfect epitomizing examples of like interpersonal conflict playing out in a play. And then there's inner conflict, so psychological conflicts or conflicts with the self. Interpersonal conflicts really do tend to be the domain of theater. I think, novels tend to be the zone of interiority, and films are good at smashing helicopters into buildings. And also, I think, theater has performers who are live and who in real time can play out interpersonal conflict for the amusement of the audience. So we tend to go for that. But personally, like I would say, for me, I love interiority and I like going after the psychology of a particular character. And I like hearing their thoughts in direct address. So my plays definitely, I think, deal in inner conflict a lot. And none of this obviously is prescriptive. You can smash helicopters into buildings on stage if you want. Okay, so conflict can take place on all 3 levels or 2 of the levels. So what runs the rising action is the desire of the protagonist coming into conflict with the antagonist or forces of antagonism. Typically, both forces, protagonism and antagonism, are powerful and they are a match for each other. The thing about rising action is that there are usually negative and positive story turns. So we sometimes think that our protagonist will succeed and we sometimes don't. And it's this mechanism of suspense that hooks the audience into the play, the conflict. So they've gone forth with their desire, and sometimes it seems like they're going to succeed at their desire, and sometimes it feels like they're going to fail at their desire. And the will they, won't they, will they, won't they is the mechanism of suspense that audiences are watching. So there are really, really easy examples of rising action. I think they're almost self-explanatory. In Saltwater Moon, Jacob shows up, tries to convince Mary to marry him for an hour. Romeo pursues Juliet. Macbeth kills various people to become king. So, okay, sidebar. I have a lot of sidebars. In lots of plays, especially modern ones, you know, and I'm going to the canon partly because I know those are plays we all know. But anyway, in most modern plays, who the protagonist and who the antagonist are submerged. So you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell. There's no clear antagonist or protagonist, they're interchangeable. You know, and usually that's because we're after a certain amount of complexity, and then both the antagonist and the protagonist have complexity, and we don't know which one is in the right or in the wrong. There's no clear good guy or bad guy. Okay, so in structure, there are three parts: inciting incident, rising action, the last one is the climax or the resolution. At the climax, the protagonist does or does not get what they want, or they get it or do not get it in a way they don't expect, or they sort of get it, or they half get it, or they a quarter get it. Lots is possible. And the protagonist is usually transformed by either getting it or not getting it. The suspense is resolved, the central question is resolved or not resolved, deliberately or otherwise. The themes that the central question opened up are either resolved or deliberately not resolved. So the climax brings about irreversible change. The protagonist is altered by the events of the narrative, i.e. the protagonist learns at the end of the play, or they die, or their identity is forever changed. So we're typically talking about an extreme event, the climax. Another way of putting it is this. So here's me like turning it to see if there's like anything else useful that I can say in a different way. It's the event that we, the audience, have all been waiting for. And from the first moments of the play, we have a sense that this scene or set of scenes is coming, and we want desperately to know what will happen in this part of the narrative. It's the answer to the inciting incident. It that unbalanced the world, it rebalances the world at the climax. So the examples are all obvious. Romeo and Juliet die for love of each other. Jacob wins over Mary in Saltwater Moon. Hamlet kills his father's murderer at the cost of his own life. So just a really quick note on climaxes and endings. There's at least in TV, there's a tendency to use these terms like an up ending, a down ending, and an ironic ending, which is you win some, you lose someone, you lose some. Like just technically, we often talk about upending things or down ending things or ironic ending things. I would say for the most part, if I were to assess our entire medium, I would say we do like ironic endings generally. So we often talk about an ending that's both familiar because we were expecting it since the inciting incident, and surprising because it's not the ending we were expecting. This obviously isn't the case in classical tragedy or comedy where endings were expected and only the how was in question. How are you doing? Hope you're doing okay. Okay, so, all right.
It's Jessie, you're doing great. With the chat box, everybody's saying hello and enjoying everything you're doing so far, and lots of really warm and kind things. You're doing well.
So fast, I'm like panting.
It's totally good. You're good. You're doing awesome. Keep going.
All right. All right. So And now I'm going to talk about the 5 most common structural problems that I've heard theater makers, and in particular artistic directors and dramaturgists, point out in writing or in the creation of projects. Okay, so number 1, the protagonist doesn't want something, so there's no identifiable desire, and you have a passive protagonist, is the first one. And that one's fairly self-explanatory. The second is the protagonist is inactive in pursuing their desire, or is given no reasonable way to pursue their desire by the playwright. You have a protagonist who wants to, for instance, end war, but they don't have a way that they can go about doing that. So the desire is difficult to, okay, so yes, and in a weird way, this made me write down this, which is usually a desire is, or typically, you know, unless this is a part of the structure you're fucking with, the desire is difficult to achieve, but not impossible to achieve of the protagonist. Number 3 of the 5 most common structural problems that I've seen. The forces of antagonism are not strong enough and not a match for the protagonist, so it becomes too easy for the protagonist to achieve their desire. Number 4, the play does not end when the protagonist does or does not get what they want, but continues long past the point of the climax, or long past the point of the climax. Past when you've used up your suspense mechanism. And then number 5, the protagonist is not altered by the climax. There is no transformation. So probably the desire was not big enough, not extreme enough, and therefore not transformative enough. So, okay, now I have lots of weird little notes because I didn't know where to put stuff. So a note on universal stories. We all talk about this all the time. A lot of stories are the same story. Human stories we all watch because we connect to the desire of the protagonist so immediately. And there's like only a certain number of extreme desires you can offer your protagonist, and you can pile them up too. But that's why we tend to have a lot of stories, I think, that group around certain types of extreme human experience, like trying to get love, trying to not get killed, trying to, you know, or kill, either survival or revenge. Trying to find out the answer to sort of a big question of identity, who am I, or of culpability, who killed my father, or if you're a detective, a lot of detective stories just center around a big mystery, right? Who killed the person lying dead in front of me? So those just, a lot of stories I think just tend to get grouped around those areas of story just because they offer some extremes. That sort of everyone is looking for in terms of stakes and in terms of starting that suspense motor. Okay, I have a bunch of weird notes here. So character. So when you talk, I mean, it would be so easy to talk about character in so many different ways from so many different angles, but if you talk about character structurally alone, I would say that the plot is fused, or the structure is fused to what your character wants. And so a structural way of talking about story is to say your character is their desire, which is also Aristotelian. It's how he talked about character, that the character is the sum total of desire. And I would also say this, like, I really like to work with characters that have conflicting desires, which makes for a complex character. It makes for internal conflict. Yeah. So I already break that rule. A character is one desire. Okay, a note on character and likability. I just wanted to talk about this because I feel emotional about it. I think we often are in TV land, sometimes we distinguish between likability and relatability. Likability is you put yourself in the shoes of the person and you become them, you go on their journey. But relatability is you don't, is you understand the desires and motives of a character, but you're not being asked by the story to put yourself in their place. So that's an anti-hero, like Richard III is relatable because we understand his desires, but not necessarily likable. He's still fascinating to watch because we understand what he wants and what's driving him. I think when anyone talks about a story as being less universal because of an anti-hero, I feel like that's bullshit. I write a lot of non-likable but relatable characters. As long as you can key audiences into the desires of a character and show what they want, I think, and what their psychology is, I think I never feel that audiences aren't with me with my unlikable characters. Yeah. Okay, so okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the non-narrative before I move on to vision, which is in a weird way the most interesting part of structure anyway. So a traditional structure, or tends to hold the audience's attention, and I think that is its big appeal for writers in durational pieces. So when I'm working on pieces that have a muted narrative or non-narrative, I usually try and figure out how to replace the structure. This is a big topic, and I'm going to go through it as fast as I can and make as much sense as I can. This is just what I've identified. Like, I have no idea what everyone else thinks about this, but here are some ways that like writers and theater makers have bent structure that I can easily identify moving when they move their pieces from more narrative to less narrative work. And I'm going to go actually in my ordering here from like what is still fairly narrative through to less narrative. So like one way that I've seen theater makers go at less narrative is episodic work or picaresque work, where you can cram in a lot of side plot. I'd say Unity 1918 is probably an example of, on the more narrative side, you follow B, but there's lots of other strong characters in it. And or there's like a lot of theater out there that's held together with a slight narrative. Like I think Théâtre de Complicité does that really well. So then you can also unite stories using a more thematic way of going at it rather than narrative. So you can have multiple protagonists and multiple plot lines, or multi-plot, like Lion in the Streets, Palace of the End, both do those. La Ronde does that. And you're linking short pieces or mini plays by theme rather than by escalating conflict. But each short piece contains its own narrative arc. Inciting incident, rising action, climax, and the audience sort of feels a great deal of satisfaction by a sort of collage based on theme. Another one is achronological work, like Pinter's Betrayal, goes backwards in time. Inciting incident, rising action, and climax are all still there, but it's non-chronologically, and they all move backwards. So you can run the whole structure in reverse and it still works. Also, I use this a lot. I reorder, I reorder plays through memory of a character. And so I go achronological based on memory, but then I do disorder, rising action, inciting incident, and climax. This is like a completely out of place note in a way, but I would say another way to do something that's essentially, that travels into the zone of non-narrative is in Pinter's plays. They have narrative structure, but there's no exposition of the narrative structure. So we don't understand what the fuck we're watching, which is which creates a kind of menace, and is his point. But we're following the suspense without understanding its specifics. And then, Beckett is another great example because he lops off pieces of the structure. He has an offstage inciting incident, like many plays do. There's a reason they're waiting for Godot. And we see a tiny piece of rising action, they're waiting, and then he just stops his structure there, and that spoke beautifully to the aftermath of World War II. I really, I think one of the things that, because I think the structure is so strong and we know it so well because we're also over entertained, you can basically cut off lots and lots of pieces of it and the audience still follows it. And then I think that I titled this like meta theatrical suspense, and it's creators who replace like what's going to happen to the characters with what is this all about, like, so the audience is trying to decipher the piece, and the suspense is located in the meta theatrical, almost like, what am I watching, or why am I, what is this, what is happening? And then as the pieces start to synthesize at the end, you find out what's happened. A good example of this, I think Daniel McIver does this, he in Here Lies Henry, you don't at first know like what you're watching or why, and as it, you know, as the pieces add up, you start to understand what you're watching. Yeah. So I think like a lot of the non-narrative theater I see, I would say, has probably got some elements of narrative in it, but stretches narrative to the limit. Yeah, and I also think that there's like a lot of other elements that can hold the audience's attention. Dance elements can, images, music, laugh lines will do it. There's like, you know, you can go up and down the scale of like beautiful to crass. Pornography holds people's attention. I think that then the big thing I would say is you can absolutely remove narrative or pieces of narrative. Then it's just about trying to figure out how to hold an audience's attention durationally. Yeah. And then I think, you know, another last word on non-narrative is there's, I think that it is desirable. I don't know why I'm mincing my words around this. I think it's desirable to have your work be intentionally non-narrative. I've seen non-intentionally non-narrative work, and sometimes it will work anyway. But I think, you know, my experience is sometimes when work is non-narrative, it's because the creator's vision of the piece isn't working. Yeah. But I personally tend to really love non-narrative work, partly because there's a tendency for it to be original. Okay, so I've also heard that there are like a lot of specific rules that you need to start a play at the 5-minute mark. Really, I think all that's bullshit. For me, knowing all this has helped me to be kind of intentional and rigorous in how I disregard structure, which I often do. None of this should limit you. It should make you feel like you have knowledge that empowers you. If it doesn't do that, you should disregard it. Yeah. Okay. All right. I have one note here before I leave non-narrative on ambiguity versus incoherence. I tend to think of ambiguity as opening up 2 or more possibilities in the mind of the audience, and it's a more complex structure because I'm trying to make them think either this or this happened, or 3 things, whereas incoherence offers up chaos, which is okay if it's what you intended or that's what you were hoping for. Yeah, but I think ambiguity for me is about a multiple versus 1 possibility of what occurred at a climax or in an inciting incident. And it tends to just be a trickier construction. I wrote, if we were in person, I'd ask you, why write a play? Okay, so I think what I meant to talk about was why I'm now going to talk about vision, which is the other side of structure. So that was all just to talk about structure to arrive back at talking about vision. I really like this quote. It's from Morwen Brebner, who is a playwright and a TV writer, and she wrote on vision, I think. She wrote, the idea that your play is your message to your age is crucial. That's what writing a play is. It's your message to your age. It presumes that you are embedded in your time, engaged in its struggles, and that you have things to say, vital things that are more than just about you and your feelings. I feel like that, you know, holds you to account as a writer. So I think that's why I like it. Your play's vision is what you're communicating about the world to your audience. It's your content. It is above all your comment about the world to the audience, your communication of your vision. So I believe my culture, human experience, human psychology is like this. It shows your thought or philosophy or questions or instincts about what life is or what love is or what war is. I feel a little bit vulnerable doing this, but I'm going to use one of my own plays as an example. I thought it might be useful because that way you could see how my mind in particular thinks about visions. You can see, what I was processing as I was writing a play. So it's East of Berlin. And I'd say that, like, if I go back and try and analyze what I was after, I would say, in terms of vision, I would say, and East of Berlin is a play in which the child of a Nazi reckons with his legacy and the legacy of his father. So I would say that I was after this. We are overshadowed by history. We are bound to love our parents, even if they're monsters. The legacy of our mothers and fathers, if it is embedded in war, is trauma. The legacy of genocide is broken lives, trauma, and a lack of wholeness. I think that's what I was after in terms of my vision. Yeah, and so I guess I partly wanted to use that as an example because I think you can work multiple themes within the same work. You can work multiple visions, thematic visions. So I think I was both after, how biological love is, and that you cannot change or choose who you love if it's your mother or father. And I was also after history overshadowing the present. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the intersection of structure and vision. So structure is the vehicle for your vision. It's how you're going to communicate or deliver your vision to your audience. So the structure of the play allows you to show your vision in the form of a human story. The play or the narrative or series of events or actions act as a seduction to your ideas. It's you persuading the audience and enlightening them, and at the end, hopefully they go, that's so true, life's just like that. But then, okay, so the question is, how is the vision actually expressed in your play? So this is really complicated, and so I'm going to try and restate it in different ways. So when an inciting incident occurs, it opens up specific questions like Macbeth becomes king, will Macbeth become king? But it also opens up thematic questions like, does murderous ambition pay off or not? So at the end of the play, in the climax, where structure and vision fuse, and it's the most intense point of communication or the high point of communicating with your audience at the climax, then you answer to your central thematic question, i.e., when you answer your central question, you speak to your vision. Or, okay, stated the opposite way, to discover the meaning you are communicating, go to the end of your work and decide what it communicates about whatever you're writing about. For instance, if at the end of your play, your characters discover that true love exists despite modern technology, that's your vision. It's the end of your play where structure and vision converge. Your protagonist does or doesn't get what they want. And if they do get what they want, you're communicating one vision. And if they don't get what they want, you're communicating another vision. And if they kind of get what they want or get part of what they want, you're communicating a different vision about what you think of the main central question you've been asking. So again, Arthur Miller is such a structuralist, it's easy to pull from him. When you've got the ending, you've got the play. And it's at the end that you, the playwright, take responsibility for your vision and what you are communicating. So back to the example of Macbeth, unfettered ambition leads to ultimate success. To being king is in there just as much as ambition leads to self-destruction. And it's the beats of the play in the rising action. So Macbeth oscillates between getting what he wants and not getting what he wants. He is or isn't going to be king. And Shakespeare ends the play with, unfettered homicidal ambition is self-destructive. He's really clear. And that's very Shakespearean. Shakespeare tends to always restore ethical order and world order at the end of his work. Alice Munro never does. She always does the opposite, in my experience of her. Okay, so these are kind of cool. The structural problems are always not that interesting, and structure is almost not that interesting, but vision problems really are interesting, at least to me. So how much more time do I have? Okay, 15 more minutes. So, okay, the four most common vision problems. So 1, the playwright is too conscious of the meaning of their play and is trying to impose their views on it. The play becomes didactic, it's propaganda. the counter argument is not strong enough in the play. So this is a complicated one because sometimes I think didacticism has a place, and I think I've seen didactic plays work incredibly well, but this is a sort of complaint that I hear. It speaks to our particular aesthetics of the moment. We're not that keen on didacticism at the moment. That hasn't been true in past eras, but anyway, that's one I hear a lot. So like, for instance, to avoid didacticism, your play's burden is to argue the opposite. To investigate the question of war, your play will hopefully do both. War leads to glory and victory and brotherhood and sisterhood, and war leads to destruction. Or, you know, so it becomes about the good and the bad if you've written a didactic play rather than the complex. And again, I think that there are some topics where, yeah, didacticism might be okay. Everything is okay in depending on the parameters of the work, I think. Okay, number 2. The writer is not at all conscious of what their play is communicating, doesn't know their vision, and as a result can't birth it or articulate it within the context of the play. I think that one's fairly self-explanatory. Number 3, the writer, this one's cruel, but you know, the writer doesn't have an original vision, and the play is boring, or the play is obvious, and we all agree on what they're trying to communicate, so there's no new insight there. And number 4, the playwright has a vision, but doesn't have the technical skill to fuse their vision to their structure, i.e. the play doesn't communicate their vision. This is an execution rather than a design problem. So number 2, where the playwright doesn't know their vision, I think is a slightly different than this one, because in this case, it's actually just an execution issue, whereas that's a design issue, if that makes any sense. But this last one, number 4, is the one I see the most often, to be honest with you, when I work with younger playwrights or emerging playwrights. You know, here's how I know it's happening. This is the clearest signal of it is the young writer or the emerging writer will tell me their ideas, and those ideas will be really good, but those ideas won't be expressed in their piece of writing yet. So it's just about learning how to execute their design of their idea, rather than an issue of not having a vision or not knowing what their vision is. And also, a lot of time when you're on your first draft, you don't know what your vision is. I don't. So I'll say this too. I think vision problems are more serious than structure problems generally. I would 100% for myself rather watch a play with an amazing vision where the playwright hasn't figured out structure than a play where the playwright is masterful of structure, but the vision is banal or uninteresting. Also, I think structure problems are generally easier to resolve than vision problems in my experience. There'll be lots of people who will have different perspectives, obviously. Okay, so how do you write a play, find a vision, discover dramatic material? Like, I don't know. I don't really know. I do it by writing a first draft without really understanding what I'm doing. Then I try and figure out what the first draft is doing, what's already in it. You know, it's got to be some combination of like experience and research and imagination and subconscious and inspiration, sudden inspiration. I don't really know. Yeah. Okay. All right, so these are just some final considerations. There's 10 more minutes. These are all a little disordered because I feel like I could probably talk, like there's a lot to say about each of these, but I'm gonna try and just go through a few points. Okay. These may or may not be considerations for you too. So one structural consideration is macro, because your play is not just in a vacuum of its own, but it fits into the practice of your medium and into the canon of work that exists and is currently being created, and it's in conversation with them. So another way of saying this is like, you can consider whether your play is affirming or subverting the norm of your era. And I don't necessarily think subversion is cool. Like, you can subvert the widely held notion, for instance, that like Jews are people. That would make you a Nazi. It would be subversive. so I'm not, you know, I think we like the idea of subversive work, but maybe not in all cases. But it is an interesting consideration, like when you have your vision, like is it a subversive vision or an affirmative vision, is one way of thinking about it that might help you to know what it is or consider it. Okay, and then that said, a lot of the art we do admire canonically is subversive. Because I think just obviously subversion tends towards the original. Okay, so then I just have a quick note on relevance and hot topics. I think playwrights, some of them really consider this in terms of their vision. They particularly want to speak to topics that are ripped from the headlines. You know, I think some people more like me hope that whatever their interest is will generalize to other people. I've seen both work, I've seen both not work. I think relevance often comes up if you're in relationship to pieces that are set in the past. You know, typically authors have set pieces in the past to address a question that is currently relevant without addressing it head on. I think, you know, in all cases, what you're doing is you're betting on your audiences being interested in your topic and people coming to see your work, you know, because of an interest in your topic. I actually think sometimes in theater we do underrate the primacy of topic. I think a lot of the time, oddly enough, audiences are actually basing decisions on whether they like your topic. But I also think that hot topics can be off-putting or they can be a draw. So I don't know. A note on originality I have here, like it's another consideration that some people have in terms of both structure and vision. Like, is your structure, is your vision original? You know, the role of newness and originality, it used to be out of vogue. We have a real desire for it now. It's around modernism, and Ezra Pound, who said make it new, that originality became in vogue, 1920s. I think in the world of over-entertained people, you know, we have a tendency to strive for originality. But then I think that you can have originality in design, which is a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about originality. But I also, personally, I've seen originality in execution work much more often than originality in design, if this makes any sense. And in TV and film, there's a tendency to privilege originality of design. You know, like, is your log line good? Is there like a really cool new idea for a story that we've never seen? But I think a lot of stories are actually fairly banal structurally, but the execution is so stunning that we love them. Okay, so I have a note on writing plays about what you don't know. I do it, but I use expert consultants. I think there's like a lot of people out there who will tell you don't write plays on things you don't know, but I've written about theoretical physics and the war in Afghanistan, but I did spend a lot of time with expert consultants. That's my split the difference on that. This is like tricky to talk about, and it's the last things I'm going to talk about. It just felt important to address it right at the end. Appropriation is what I'm going to talk about. I don't have a huge amount of authority here. I would say, like, not about us, without us is the best catchphrase I've heard. I feel like everyone should tell me that I'm wrong or disagree. There's a lot I don't know. My sister is gay, and so I've occasionally asked her, like, you know, like, what do you think of these? Like, what do you think about showing gay people on screen? And she's, you know, been really good and fast to tell me, like, what's cliche and what's caricature, what she sees a lot. You know, she said she's really sick of seeing lesbians as villains, lesbians as psychopaths. Their love stories always end in death or disappointment. She says lesbians are always fucking men, which is really stupid. So I found that helpful when she told me sort of all about that. And I think, you know, there are those groups of people who have been so villainized and treated so poorly in narrative that it's important, of course, to consult with them before you speak about them in narrative. Okay, and here I have a little bit more authority. This is a note on sexism. Here are some of the things I see that strike me as sexist, or that strike me as sort of garden variety, you know, conventional sexist. Are women showing up to complicate the plot for the men? Two brothers fight because they've both fallen in love with the same women. So women are just showing up to complicate the plot for the men. Is the woman, you know, complicating the plot by hesitating to fuck the man or fall in love with the man? I.e., is she your antagonist? And the character's antagonism resides in her not wanting to fuck someone. I've seen a lot of that. Are they limited in your work to the sexual or love interest, wives, mothers, girlfriends, and daughters of your hero? If your woman is a protagonist, is her only action to choose between which of two male characters she wants to be with or marry? So is her whole identity going to depend on her relationship with a man? And then last of all, Bechdel test. We all know this one. Do two women talk at any point in your play about something other than men? If any of these are in your work, you may be rocking some sexism. That's it. That's all I have.
That's amazing. I love closing on that note. Just like, don't do it. We have a lot of questions. Are you ready? Do you want to like have a glass of water or anything? Here you go. Perfect. Well, I can share, just because you were busy presenting, you didn't get to see, there's lots of really great notes in the chat box. People writing lots of notes and having lots of very lovely and warm things to say about the things you were sharing. So I'll make sure you see those later. So the first question is from Zoe. In the journey from being a performance-centered person doing acting training to being a creation-focused playwright, were there any resources that were fundamental to your own learning?
Yeah, well, I would say being a performer, or I've never been a performer, but I trained as one at National Theatre School. And I would say that one of the things that was super useful about my training was understanding how to support performers on stage. And so when, for instance, TV writers or novelists try and come into theater, one of the things that I talk to them about is like, how do you support a performer to give a good performance? That's your job, essentially. And I would say that, you know, because I have theater training, that's kind of at the center of what I'm interested in as a writer. And, you know, also like, you know, being a performer allowed me to know things like what dynamics are like in a rehearsal hall, and why you might want to balance how much work you give each performer, like why you might want to have 4 people with parts that are fairly equally divided between them, or if you're going to break that, why you're going to do it or how you're going to do it. And I think, you know, what it did for me was it allowed me to write scenes quite well. But what I actually didn't have, hilariously, like wasn't, you know, given that I wanted to talk about this, is a knowledge of structure. So I had a lot of like instinct about dialogue and character and how to support performers on stage, but I couldn't like add one scene on top of another to make the structure of a play until, you know, I had, in fact, Peter Hinton point out to me that I didn't know what I was doing, and that I needed to figure that out.
Peter.
In a good way. Like,
yeah.
Your characters are really compelling. They don't do anything. I was like, what? They're supposed to do something. So I think, you know, I had to figure that out. But I had instincts towards some things, and those things are things I wouldn't try and teach a masterclass on, because I'm more or less just on instinct on those things, whereas structure I had to learn. Yeah.
Okay. Next question is from Mac. When you're in a workshop room, how do you listen for pace and or structure and evaluate what parts of the draft's structure are successful?
Oh my God. That's like, it's making me work. It's a good question. I mean, to be honest with you, like it is actually being in workshop that helps me with structure and pace, because it gives me an opportunity to hear it out loud with an audience and to understand if the structure is being communicated to an audience. And for me, this is so different from other writers, but I really do need those like I like kind of over 20 people at least, so that they can act like an audience, and I listen for whether they're the piece, like the structure of the piece is communicating with them. You know, and I feel like playwrights become really good interpreters of silence. Like we're trying to figure out, like, is that bored silence?
Yeah.
Interested silence? And I really sit, like I sit at the back and I fucking watch to try and figure it out. But I would say also, yeah, like pacing, like I can start to be like, okay, like there's like dead air here, pull that. Or like, actually with me, I tend to be minimalist, which is weird. It's like less common, but I tend to like, I'm like a bit, I'll underwrite, and then I'll be like, oh, the audience can't follow, there's too few dots. Like they're not, I have a vision in my mind that's not being realized because I've given them too little. They don't understand me. But I think, you know, there's a real tightrope there between banality and indecipherability. You can pull like 4 words and tip yourself one way or another. But yeah, I listen for all that really closely, and workshops for me work. Like I do that work in workshop.
Okay. Next question from Chelsea. You said sometimes the inciting incident happens pre-play off stage. What's your opinion on that? How does that affect the rest of the play's structure?
I think it's like neutral. I think either can work beautifully. Like lots and lots of writers have done one or the other and done like a beautiful job. I think, you know, it really depends on your work and what your aesthetic preference is. It's not even all that aesthetic. Like it's not like non-narrative to narrative where like people have hot feelings. I think it's just whatever the fuck works for your play.
Perfect. Catherine asks, when you initially write from theme or character, what techniques do you use to structure during revision? Thanks so much. Do you want me to read that again? When you initially write from theme or character, what techniques do you use to structure during revision?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I like that we both leaned in, like, it's like, I just need to speak clearly. Sorry.
No, it's good. No, I'm like, I have a 4-year-old, so I've played endless games of Monopoly this morning, and now I'm like trying to do this. Well, honestly, like I'll write from fragment of character. Like I'll write from hearing one line that a character said to me, but I'll tend like it'll be progressive too, like through a workshop process. Like I'll often write something and I'll have no idea what the structure is. And then I'll I'll literally go and check and see if it has one. Like and it's like, it has a feeling of grinding because I'll be like pulling myself off instinct and into an articulation of what my piece is actually trying to do. And, you know, like I've gotten there as late as like last previews in terms of really understanding what I'm up to. That's me. Like a lot of people, you know, wouldn't want to get that far. But sometimes I can't, like, I just can't quite understand what I'm up to until really late. I don't do that as much anymore. That's when I was younger. Now I'll know at some point in the workshop process, like, oh, here's the structure. Yeah, but I'll still even like, especially with like less narrative work, like where I did a confessional piece called Secret Life of a Mother. And like, in rehearsal for the premiere, I was like, I had one night where I went over it all again because I was like, is there a fucking structure in here? I really hope so. Yeah.
Love it. Okay, Anna asks, what is your process when you are writing elements or stories that are very personal to you or your history? How much do you amend to distance yourself or network or not from the content?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think, you know, one of the things I've learned the hard way from writing something biographical, not autobiographical, was that if there is no inherent structure within the biography of the person, like no narrative dramatic structure, it's going to be really hard. And so I've been asked a few times to write, you know, projects based on the life of someone, and I've read their life and been like, I can't, because there's no narrative structure in this life. So it actually, for me, like the question with my own, like, because I've written one confessional, like one piece that's my own life, the question really was like, is there a narrative structure in my own experiences or not? And that was basically the only way, because I find it really like, you know, I already feel fairly like approximate about structure, to be honest. Like, it's not my strong suit. Nobody invites me into TV rooms because I'm good at structure, believe me. Everyone invites me in because I know how to, you know, figure out characters, and because it's like super useful to have a playwright who can write a bottle episode, like on a TV show. Like, that's why I get invited in. But yeah, like I'm looking for, like, are there elements of narrative or dramatic structure within my own life experience? And yeah, that's how I do it. Otherwise it does become too subjective.
Too much, yeah. Cheyenne asks, how do you justify the work as a play? As opposed, sorry, I was just waiting for the interpreters to switch. How do you justify the work as a play as opposed to a novel, film, podcast, etc.? What does the audience gain in witnessing story?
I mean, it's going to be so dependent on each set of, you know, like, I think who the person who's asking me that is asking me personally. I mean, I would say, like, for me, like, because I work in other mediums, there's a great pleasure to coming back to theater because of the liveness, you know, which is kind of the obvious answer, but I can't, you know, it's also the true one. I can't be original. I have to be truthful. Yeah, I love that it's live, and I like that I can hear everyone laugh together. Like, I think they enjoy the experience of that, of laughing together or experiencing the things together. And I like it. I like writing for that, knowing that everyone will be there together experiencing it. So it's a fun medium for me in which to go after provocative questions, because I know that everyone will be forced to think about that provocative question together in one space. And it feels old to me. There's something old about the medium, about us all. It just feels old in a good way. Like, it's like got like religion in it and ancient things. So I come back to it for that. And I think because I get to tell stories that are super, super naturalist in TV, because in a way that the form of TV is almost fixed, naturalism. I like to come back to theater and like fuck around. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I got a little verklempt there for a second. Like, oh, be in a room with other people. I can't wait.
I know it's really hot to talk about that right now, and we can't do that. That's what I like about theater. So I'm aware that that's, like, you know, I'm in the lucky position of being able to like move between mediums.
Yeah. Charlotte asks, how can you work exposition into the dialogue in a not awkward way? It's a big question.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. And
everyone leans in, like, tell me more.
Oh man, it's really hard. And I think it's like, I sometimes get around it through direct address, to be honest with you. So I just go after exposition in direct address, because then I can just like hand it to you, and I don't have to spend all this time like kind of with something and like, look over here, I'm exposition, you know. But like, people, you know, I feel like I could probably talk about that at great length at some point. Like, if I spent some time thinking about like all the ways, like if I cataloged all the ways writers go about expositing like information, but like for sure, like jokes, and for sure they like, there's like ways and ways that I've seen writers do it, like just slip it in, and I'll be like, wow, that was good exposition. I didn't feel it. Like, I didn't feel the wheels turning of the writer being like, I have to exposit this thing. But I honestly think for me, I just like work real hard. Like, I just work real hard at it. Like, and I know, and people call me out on it. Like, I have a film project with a company in Toronto, and like one of the notes, and it always like hurts my heart, but one of them was like, this sounds like exposition. I was like, fuck. I tried so hard and I failed. And then I had to go back and like figure it out again. But I will say this, I think a lot of the time the things that we need to exposit don't actually need to be exposited. So one of my tricks is to just not exposit things. I hope that helps.
Done. There you go. Yvette asks, what are your favorite resources or books on writing?
Oh man. I mean, I feel like I haven't really read books on writing in a long time. I know I did, but I mean, honestly, like the way I went at structure was there was like maybe 30 plays that I just read over and over and over again until I figured their structure out. Like, and on that list was like it was like a lot of Canadian plays. It was like The Little Years by John Mighton. Like, I no joke, I've read that play 30 times. And when John Mighton, because by then I knew him, although at the time I was really like just trying to figure it out using his play. But he added a scene when he did it at Stratford years later, and I was like, what the fuck? He did that play so well. I was like, what? And I could
Mind blown.
I could hear every line that he changed, and then he and I talked about it afterwards because I was like, I can't believe he changed that play. Like, I based some of how I know how to write plays on the structure of that play.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think like there was about 30 plays that I just like read and read and read until I could figure out like, oh, here are the structural markers.
Amazing. Would you be willing to share that list with us? Or a semblance of that list?
Yeah.
Not right now, but like, because we sent a follow-up email with a link to the presentation, and I was like, I'm sure some people would want to know what other kind of plays were on there. Yeah. I know I would. You don't have to share it if you want to. It's just an idea. Okay. Annette asks, could you talk about structure for one-person plays? Is it the same rules of structure or different in any way?
I mean, I don't think it's vastly different, or it hasn't been in the plays that I've seen that are one-person plays. I haven't seen vastly different structures. I think that I have seen more of the like meta theatrical suspense where we're like, we don't know what this person is talking about, and it becomes clear over the course of the piece. Where like, as opposed to like, what is going to happen as a question, the central question is sort of more in the zone of like, what the fuck am I watching? But it's compelling enough that you're like, there's some mystery in it that's holding audience's attention. But I think the same principles apply. It's just a lot of it tends to be more told or acted out rather than in a dynamic between more characters, honestly.
Yeah. So just doing a quick time check. It is 2:13. So we've got 17 minutes-ish to keep answering questions, and we've got about 13 in the box. We'll probably not get to all of them, but we will do as many as we can. So I'm going to keep going if that's all right. Liam asks, when do you find you have clarity, when do you find you have clarity with your vision within the writing process?
Yeah, I mean, again, pretty late sometimes, and also like, especially if you're working with like a vision that contains a number of different sort of central questions that are opened up, or like, you know, if you're working on like multiple levels, like you can have a number of different themes that, you know, and I tend to like working with like a lot of vision in a piece. And so like, because I'm trying to coordinate like a bunch of different ideas, thematic ideas that are all kind of interwoven with each other, it'll be late. And I have a lot of time of not knowing, like a lot of it, of not knowing. Yeah, you know, there's a lot of not knowing in the process. Yeah. Like I really am like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just have a feeling that this is important or compelling, or I don't want to drop it out of the piece yet until I understand it better. But, you know, I really try and figure it out. Like, you know, I try really hard to figure it out before I go into rehearsal for a premiere, but I don't always. Yeah.
Someone earlier in the chat said, you had said, I don't know about, and you were answering your own question, and somebody wrote that was really refreshing to hear. And I think that holds true for this question too. Someone asks, how can an actor writer get into a TV writer's room? And is there any way in Canada to learn about show running or to be an intern to a showrunner? Pardon me.
Oh yeah, I mean, for better or for worse, I think TV tends to be super hierarchical. So it's like, you can definitely like be a story assistant, or a writer's assistant, like a writer's like in a room. And generally, like there's all these sort of graded positions, and a lot of people start in at like writing assistant, and then like on some shows there's a writing assistant and a story coordinator, and those are both like junior positions that are meant to like give people an apprenticeship in the medium. And you're in a writing room with a showrunner, and then like a series of writers who all have different titles, and it's all graded. It's all graded hierarchically. So like there are the junior writers and the senior writers, and within the senior writers, there's the co-executive director, who is just one below the showrunner, and then there's the producing titles are higher, and then anything without producer in it is lower. I think my last title that I went out on was co-producer, which is the lowest of the producing titles. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's a medium in which like no one will let you show run until you've been in some of those positions and seen it up close. But I would say this too, like for anybody who doesn't know, like who is interested in the technical, mechanical, structural side of story, like it's a fucking education in that, because there'll be people in the room who are just so good at it. Like really like, and the nickname for them in the room is usually the story machine. Like there'll be one or two story machines in every room who is like brought in because they're so good at structure and so good at story, and that is not me. Yeah. So I don't know. Yes, 100%. You can totally like become a writing assistant. Yeah.
Great. Story machine. I'm writing that down mentally. When you have a really compelling, inciting incident idea, where do you go from there in the writing process? Next steps? Question mark. That was a terrible read. When you have a really compelling, inciting incident idea, where do you go from there in the writing process? Next steps? Question mark. Is that better? Or?
I mean, I think like it just depends on what kind of writer you are and like how. I mean, for me, like it would be all about the character, and so I'd be like, well, you know, like character is plot for me. You know, I can't fucking figure out plot without knowing what my characters are and what they want. And so I would be like, well, what does my character, you know, want to do? You know, with an inciting incident. I think sometimes inciting incident and conceit get confused. And like a conceit is like you have a really like a high concept idea, like a genre idea, or like, and that can be good too. But if it's an inciting incident, then it's like the desire of a character, and that desire should hopefully, I wish I could like help more, but that desire should like motivate rising action. Like what are the obstacles to that desire is the next like a really structuralist question you would ask, or just like what's the psychology of that character? What are they going to do next? I hope that helps.
Okay, let's go with 10 more minutes. So still lots of questions. Kristen asks, do you work with a dramaturg? If so, how closely and at what point? And then someone says, if I may add to this question, how do you best use your dramaturg as a helpful resource? Do you have one go-to person, or does it change project to project? So dramaturg.
Yeah, I mean, for me, because a lot of the time, like I'll have some sense of what I want to communicate with a piece by the time I go to it. By the time I'm after going to a dramaturg, I'll be like, and then a lot of what I'm asking is like about clarity. Like I'm like, and I should be careful saying clarity, because sometimes like what I want is ambiguity. So I'll be like, is this ambiguous? So I'll be like, have I create like structured, and are you clear that I'm being ambiguous? If that makes any sense. But yeah, no, I'll go to a dramaturg when I'm like, tell me like can you just tell me what this is about to you? And then I'll tell you if it's what I want it to be about. And I'll be able to get a sense of if there's a gap between what I want and what's on the page, or like what's actually being communicated, which is all also super tricky in theater, where like meaning is derived from direction and performance and design as well. So it's like a fucking shit show, but I do ask dramaturgs to tell me, you know, what is it communicating to you?
Perfect. When you're creating a new work, where does the play usually start for you? Do your ideas tend to come from a character, a theme, a location, an image, etc.?
Character.
Character.
Every time. Yeah, it's really, but that's, you know,
That's perfect.
I feel like people really, that's not their way. Like that seems to me like one of the places where writers really diverge in terms of how they, and it's all success. It can all be successful. So, but I feel like, yeah, I come at it through psychology. Character.
Perfect. This is a really great segue. Thank you, Anna, and everybody who upvoted so that Anna could go next. How do you, as the creator, go about making decisions for your characters and or rising action? Do you test out several ideas? Do you simmer for a long time? Do you have a strong idea when you start out, despite being an emergent writer? And then she says, as a sidebar, you just mentioned what my character says to me. Can you elaborate on what you mean there? So decisions for characters.
Like, what my character says to me, like, oh, I said that about my characters. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. Like like it feels really, really cliche, but I think like I really do, I hear characters and I'm like, they're saying these things. And then I start there. Like I'll hear a fragment of dialogue, like I'll hear a fragment, like one line of dialogue, and I'll be like, that's what they're saying. And then I, like sometimes for me, a whole piece will come from that one line. I do that a bit less now, but that's definitely the Russian play. And in fact, that because I don't, like I had horror being interviewed about the Russian play because I like could not really tell you how I wrote it. Like yeah, like I just heard her saying like, where do you hide a piece of bread? Which is one of the lines in the play. And then I just wrote the whole thing. So I just didn't know. I didn't have like a good, like, here's how this was my inspiration. Yeah. The other part is rising action and making decisions for the characters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do test out different things. Like a bunch of shit comes into my head. I mean, I test out different things if I think I've gone down the wrong path. Like I'll often hit a path, and I'll have to like stop and think for a while and be like, okay, that's not like something's like out. Something's not true in terms of the character. That's not a good, you know, and then I'll just backtrack. So I'll backtrack to where I last felt good. And then I'll be like, okay, this felt good, but this didn't, this I don't believe. Or like, and a lot of it is just like the push pull, like Harold Pinter said this thing that was like, he talked about how like characters sometimes do what they want to do and sometimes they do what I want them to do. And I'm like, I do that. I'm like trying to get my characters to do things and then it just feels bad. And then I go back on it and try and figure it out. And that's all in the like rising action part of it. Yeah, but it is a lot of like trial and error and like grinding. Like I just sit there and try really hard for long stretches.
Long stretches.
Yeah, I just try.
Next question is, I'd be interested in how you feel structure for theater differs from structure for novels or short stories.
Yeah, I have a way less experience with publishing than I have with any other medium, honestly. Like I've fucking written opera, but I don't have a lot of experience with publishing. I mean, I think my impression, for what it's worth, is that a lot of interiority is possible in novels and short stories. And so you're really able to like work with internal conflict in a way that it's like maybe feels like the medium where that is the most available. I think also like that's a medium that really lends itself to like a break, like on the stage is pretty unforgiving. Like you have a captive audience who are like, make something happen. I need some suspense, or I'm just like, I don't want to sit here. I feel like, you know, there's such different mediums because theater is a temporal spatial medium and a novel or a short story is an object. Like it's just an entirely different, you know, but for sure, when I read novels, I hear the same things working in them. Like I hear the same structure working, but often it's like broken down. And I think, you know, in novels, there's like often a lot of use of beautiful language in a good way, like that also kind of holds your attention to that medium. Like you're like you're in like a coma of beautiful language half the time. So that medium feels really spacious to me, like a lot is possible. Like, yeah, like you can, I would think that in that medium, you can really break down narrative to like the highest degree of any, you know, in a way that I would be scared to do on stage.
Yeah. Next question, how to identify execution issues and repair early in the process?
Sorry, say that again.
How to identify, we're both getting really close, sorry. How to identify execution issues and repair early in the process.
Execution issues, yeah. Man, I mean, that's just like, that one's hard because it's so specific to each work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, I think like, if you know like what your vision is, if you're aware of what it is and you're not still searching for it. So I'd say if you're in the phase where you don't know what your vision is yet, you kind of just have to keep writing until you figure that out. If you're an emergent writer, or like if you're a different kind of writer, you want to like sit down and figure that out, you know, like for yourself in whatever way, whatever fucking weird way you masterminders do it. Yeah, but then if you do know what your vision is, then like there are ways to go through your structure and be like, is my, you know, vision being communicated at this point, at this point, at this point? You can go through it and be like, okay, is this in or out? Like, is this in or out? Or is this part that is off my vision actually what I want to have the whole thing be about anyway? So like, if I take this out, I'm not compelled by it anymore at all. So then you want to concentrate on that part, you know. And I think like, I don't even know if I said this in the, but like the danger is you can, you know, if you mastermind too much, you will make something schematic potentially. But anyway, yeah, like I think, you know, execution is just about like, is your vision being communicated through all points in your story? Is it in there? That's the main, you know, execution issue I see.
Yeah. Okay, this is the last question. Erin asks, how does reoccurring imagery play a role in your writing process?
Yeah, so there was like a whole part that I jumped over where I sort of talk about some of that stuff like metaphor, because then that really gets into like that's in a whole, like that's in a sort of subcategory of vision and theme and like and form and tone and style, like all of that would be an entirely other.
It's a part two.
Things that
that's what I'm hearing.
Potentially address, but like,
yeah,
for sure. Sometimes I work with imagery because I feel like it's a way to access the subconscious. That's like my fast response. Yeah, I work with imagery for sure sometimes, but you know, it's taken me a long time. Like, it's been a long time before I've like really even dealt in the world of images and metaphor. I think as a writer, I came at it through like a desire for authenticity and not through a desire for images and metaphor, but I really admire it in the writers who go after it. I think partly because I'm not very good at it. Yeah.
All right, that's it for the questions. Daryl, I'm going to ask you to please. Oh, you're getting really fast at that. That's awesome. Hannah, thank you so much. I'm going to turn my camera off and leave you with Daryl. Thanks, and we'll meet afterwards if you stay on.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. That was a fantastic session. Thank you. The response, like sitting here reading the chat box, has been amazing. Like it's been a really inspiring 90 minutes. So thanks for all your work.
Thanks for having me.
And also big thanks to Helen and to Ava, our interpreters, for your fantastic work. And always to Jesse for organizing all things digital here for us. And to the Edmonton Community Foundation for supporting these masterclasses. I said at the beginning that we're going all summer now, which is very exciting. So there won't be a masterclass next week, but then after that, every Monday for the rest of the summer. And our masterclasses in June include playwright Michael Healy, talking about playwriting, artistic director of the National Arts Center, Jillian Kiley, talking about directing, choreographer and director Kimberly Rampersad, talking about choreography, and theater replacements, Seminovich award-winning artistic directors Meiko Yamamoto and James Long, talking about collaboration. So it's going to be a pretty awesome month.
Yeah, those people are all right.
But thanks, Hannah. This was great, really, really great.
Thank you so much.
Jessie, do you have any last words?
I did actually. I popped on because I wanted to mention that if anybody who is currently watching, if you have any like wish list, desires, blue skies, if you have any ideas for anybody that you'd like us to bring on, you've got my email. So please email me if there's anyone you'd like to chat with. But that's it for me.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much.